Community-based terrorism prevention programs are designed to prevent radicalization to violent extremism or terrorism through a whole-of-society approach, moving past a singular law enforcement response to developing localized infrastructure and multidisciplinary community partnerships. But what happens when and where these structures are lacking? I'm Abdullahi Hassan, and this is In the Sahel, WADR's weekly magazine that delves into the heart of the African security crisis, telling the stories and strategies to shape the region's response to pressing challenges. Last week's episode was on the role of women in conflict resolution. This week's package features two experts on an important issue that presents itself as a question, and that is the stigmatization of certain communities a hindrance to the fight against terrorism in the Sahel? Remember, every once a month, In the Sahel brings you a panel discussion on security subjects or scenarios worthy of deliberations as communities or regions live with them. Now, according to the National Institute for Justice, different communities have different needs. Hence, community-based terrorism prevention programs should be developed in close consultation and cooperation with the intended audiences to avoid harmful impact and ensure program commitment, efficacy, and relevance. This can help prevent unintended, stigmatizing, and alienating effects that target or single out members of particular communities as potential national security threats. Some other benefits include building awareness and trust, providing educational opportunities for community stakeholders, and improving the likelihood of reporting by those who may see warning signs. Remember this popular security quote? See something, say something. Very well. But where communication fails and services appear inappropriate, efforts to fight against security threats may be hindered, as reported in countries of the Sahel in recent past. Joining me to discuss today's topic are two guests, Dr. Steve Okorie, a security expert from Nigeria, and Yussouf Ouattara, a public affairs analyst from Burkina Faso. Together, we gauged first the state of security in both countries, factors causing community stigmatization, and correctional measures to fix the situation. Let me quickly start with Mr. Yussouf Ouattara, currently in Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso has since 2015 at least been involved in the fight against insurgents or terrorism. Help us understand, please, what is the state of the fight against terrorism in Burkina Faso as we speak, Mr. Ouattara?
As you said, from 2015 to 2022, we have seen an upward trend in terrorism in Burkina Faso, and violence came very close to the capital city, Ouagadougou, and other major cities like Bobo-Dioulasso. But since the new regime, that's from September, October 2022, we have seen a great shift. The military have been able not only to stop the momentum of terrorists because they are no longer gaining ground, they are no longer gaining villages or cities, but the trend has changed. There have been a shift, and we have seen that there are many villages we are free now. And this last rainy season, people have been able to grow their crop, to farm their lands. But the challenge is still huge in some areas, basically in the Sahel and in the East region. So the recovery of the territory is not as fast as we would have expected. But I think that it's a positive trend. As I said, they stop the momentum of terrorist attack, and there is a little recovery. It's incremental, but I think it's good.
And I'm very sure that one of the reason for why some areas remain almost difficult for the army to reclaim will be the reason for this very discussion on this edition of the program, which is maybe the neglect of certain communities in the fight against terrorism by hearing their recommendations or suggestions or their assistance with intelligence gathering. But before we come to that, Dr. Steve Okorie, Nigeria has for a while had its fair share of fight against multi-layered security challenges, from separatist agitation to banditry, and then there was the insurgency that took off from the northeast more than a decade now. What is the current state of security today in Nigeria?
The current state of insecurity in Nigeria, if we want to begin to look at it or have a conversation around it, we'll begin to look at it from different layers or perspective. Just the way you said, we have insurgency and terrorism as one. We have banditry as another. We have also kidnapping, especially for ransom, as one. And you have the IPOB and ESM activities in the southeast, and a whole lot, right? Now, when we begin to look at it in the areas where we have made remarkable successes in the fight against different crimes that we're encountering in Nigeria at the moment. In the area of terrorism in Nigeria, there's this remarkable achievements that the military have succeeded or achieved in trying to see how to douse the way and manner terrorists carry out attacks in Nigeria. Before 2015, we saw the rate of suicide bombings, right? The UN house, the National Police headquarters here in Abuja, and all that. Now you see that the terrorists now left their base. Of course, terrorism started in the northeast, but you see that they had an inroad into the north central, into the city, the capital city of Nigeria, which is Abuja. But after 2015, when the former president Muhammadu Buhari came on board, there was this drastic reduction in the rate of attacks. But after this reduction that we saw, there was this drastic increase in the way and manner suicide kidnappings now happen in Nigeria. In the last 1 year, reported cases of ransom paid in Nigeria was 1,400 million naira to kidnappers. And out of the 36 states that we have in Abuja, about 27 states were part of this survey.
Dr. Steve was actually given a rundown of what the security situation is in Nigeria at present. And he mentioned how communities have been affected. And this is, of course, our focus today. So tell us, Mr. Ouattara, in the case of Burkina Faso, what role or roles did communities play in helping with the security situation?
Okay, thank you very much. As my brother from Nigeria has just painted the situation in Nigeria, I think the crisis in Burkina, the terrorism in Burkina, there is a feature of criminality and banditism, but basically there is also a feature of a community feature in the crisis. Of course, many experts have talk about poverty and all these things, but clearly there is a community feature, because if you look at the geographic spread of the problem, from the south, from the north, from the Sahel, the east, you will always find this community feature. And if that is true, that the crisis has a community feature, it means that community is a key variable in trying to tackle the problem. So I think community have a great role to play, first internally, because most of those problems come from internal community problem. So that's why I think that there should be internal community discussion first to fix some issues, and then how the different communities react with the government. What do they reproach to the government? What do they think the government is not doing right? I think the discussion can come now between those communities and the government. But internally, I think there's a great work that those communities should do, and it includes traditional and religious leaders. So this way, it will be kind of diagnosis, but a real dialogue. I think that will be the right way in order to tackle the problem, because this insecurity problem in Burkina and the Sahel, even we fight it with the guns and the military and all this, there should be at the end some talk between communities and the government.
But Mr. Chris, you heard Ouattara talked about community features. That's what he called it in some of the crimes that we see today across the sub-region and in countries of the sub-region. Now, is it the same for you in Nigeria? And would you say to what extent that the communities play a role in either aiding or reducing crimes and, of course, terrorism in Nigeria?
The roles of communities in combating or fighting insecurity in Nigeria is very critical and very essential. Now, it depends on the community. I give you an instance here. There's this community, the Goza community in Borno State, where terrorism is at its peak. If you look at the history of terrorism in Nigeria, it started from Goza. Now, in 2014, the emir of Goza came out to publicly state categorically that the community detests this terrorism and all that they must fight against it. Do you know, after the emir of Goza came out to make that statement or comment, 2 days later, Boko Haram killed him. So the point I'm making here is that we have seen communities that come out to fight against insurgency, terrorism, and other form of crime in Nigeria. But how far does it go? Some communities, from being killed or being attacked by these criminals, don't even speak out. I'll give you an instance of this Lukarawa terrorist group that it was in the news that it is a new terrorist group in Nigeria and all that. But the community where they stayed in Kebbi State, where they stayed, and after staying there for a while, they now attacked the community, killed about 15 persons, and went away with about 100 cattle from that very community. It was after this damage was done that the community now came out to say that this very terrorist group had been in their community for like 6 years. Oh, yes. So as a community, what we expect is that we expect them to speak out, report this issue or situation to our law enforcement agencies or agents. But did they do that? They didn't do that.
Yes. What if it's a case of mistrust or distrust like it is today? I think there was a survey done by Afrobarometer earlier this year or last year where populations actually said that they do not trust security forces who are really out there to protect them, because oftentimes victims are the ones that end up being victimized or brutalized or even punished by security forces. And so what if is an issue of erosion of trust from the civilian population, which is why today communities do not report such issues?
This particular instance that you are giving has to do with CI now, confidential informant. There are some informants that we have in our communities that give information to the police. And in the event where they go to give information to the police, and the police, rather than making it confidential or discreet, they now divulge or give the information to the criminals or the criminal elements that this was the person that came to report. But when you begin to look at it in this conversation, the way we are going, these communities, they refuse to speak out as a result of fear. Do you know why? Because there's this gap between the community and where you have our law enforcement agents or agencies, right? Because if they speak out, the time it will take our law enforcement to come to their aid in the event where they are being attacked, the damage would have been done. We don't have presence of our security agents in our very rural communities. We don't have their presence there. So anybody that is living in these rural communities, the person is living on his or her own, because the law enforcement agents are not able to protect them.
Mr. Ouattara, so you heard from Dr. Steve in the case of Nigeria, many rural communities really do not have any, or even if they have security posts, they are far from where the populations are, and so in the case of any attack, they will be left without any defense, which is why most times they don't speak out. In the case of Burkina Faso, would you say that the current regime, being a military regime, has increased its presence?
As far as the role of the community is concerned, I think it's a two instrument folded, okay? That is soft and the hard. And I think Burkina authorities, as their military authorities, we have used the community to build the volunteers forces. So, in every village now, in most municipalities now, there are volunteers. And those volunteers are from the communities. They know each other. They know everybody in the village. So whenever there's a behavior that's not very clear, they know how to do it. And they have also the intelligence. They have all the information. And now they have been given some military training, but also some military equipment. And they are connected also with the army so that they can protect the village. I think this is also a community's approach, but it's the hard approach. But we can, there is also normally the soft approach, but which I think Burkina authorities have not resorted to now. And that's the one Niger is succeeded doing. That's to rely on religious and traditional leaders in order to open pathway and communication way with extremists and to engage a dialogue. So far in Burkina Faso, I don't think that authorities have really stressed on that. They have not opened those way. But I think that's something they should do in addition to the hard aspect where they have mobilized the communities through the youth. And not only the youth, you have women, you have elders, you have religious leaders who are in those volunteers group fighting and protecting their villages. So I think we are just left with the soft aspect.
Are communities in Burkina Faso neglected or stigmatized or reduced in some of the approaches to fight against the terrorism, Mr. Ouattara?
Yes, of course, there are cases of stigmatization or stereotype for some community, and that's not today. That's for a long time. There have been those stereotypes. For example, you have some community when there is a conflict, it's the whole community that will be punished. Normally, when there is a conflict between two individuals, you settle your conflict or you go to the justice of two authorities. But in some communities, when an individual has a conflict with a person with another community, it's the whole community that will be involved. So we have inherited this for a long time, actually. And there's also those aspects of some region have been really neglected in terms of investment, in terms of program. So we have not taken into account the specificity of some community. If you take the pastoral communities, you cannot build school the same way you build school for sedentary people. So the seasons, you have to adjust the season and adjust the program to those communities. So that's why in the pastoral community, many persons have not been to school, and that's a limit. So seriously, there are some cases of stigmatization, but I think it's not just today with the crisis that we have seen those events. They trace back in history in this country, and there are serious issues to tackle.
Dr. Steve, would you say that stigmatization in this context of communities has largely, to an extent, in northeast Nigeria today, been a hindrance to the complete eradication or elimination of insurgency?
Yes, I will agree with you, because the act of treating someone, a group of people, unfairly by publicly disapproving of them, of certain benefits or their rights. We have government in place, and the government comes with different promises, right? And at the end of a tenure or 2 terms of a particular government, those promises are not fulfilled. The dividends of democracy, a lot of communities in Nigeria don't even see these dividends of democracy. Once they don't see these dividends of democracy, what do you expect? For instance, communities are levied some amount of money for them to pay for their own security. Meanwhile, there's a government in place whose primary responsibility is to provide security and welfare for its citizens. Now, the security there should be part of dividends of democracy, where there's security in place, people go about their lawful businesses and all that. Once that security is not there, and there's some group of persons, group of criminals, non-state actors, come and tell them that if you pay XYZ amount of money, we will provide your community security. what do you expect? Like Goza, for instance, is a known place for terrorism. Now, people outside Goza, what do they say about these very communities? They perceive these communities as a terror ground, So the picture out there is that anybody that comes out of that community, for instance, is perhaps a terrorist, right? Once you begin to assume that or take that position, the fight against terrorism will not yield the desired or get the desired result.
At least in the case of Nigeria, we know of this particular tribe, Fulanis. They are very stigmatized, and in every community where they reside, people fear that they are troublemongers. In Burkina Faso, is there a particular group of people that are usually stigmatized no matter the region they reside?
Yes, when I talk about community, basically in Burkina, this is the same too. It's the Fulani community which is stigmatized. And as I say, sometimes we have to sit and look at things. Nothing should be taboo, actually. We should talk about the internal community problem. We should talk intra-community problem and inter-community problem. And because if you have to build a nation, and to build a real national, I would say, citizenship, I think so all the community identity have to identify themselves first as a Burkina citizen before being from a tribe or from a community. And I think that's a challenge. And the Fulani community is facing this problem. Obviously, there's a correlation, but there's no a causation. When I say there's the correlation, because if you take the south, you take the east, and everywhere, most of those arrested or killed are from the Fulani community. But it's not causation. It's not causation. It means that it's not because they are Fulani that they are involved in this. So historically, there are some reasons. For example, you can take into account even the problem of climate change. There's no space now for pastoralism. So the economic activities area has been reduced by farm. So much, many of them cannot make a living. And it has made many of the Fulani community economically very vulnerable. And as my friend said, if you propose that person who has nothing, no perspective, he will be much more vulnerable to some proposition. I think it should come with a real diagnostic, and then it come also with economic solution, but also the building of a real citizenship, so that people can feel themselves first as a national of this country instead of seeing themselves as a specific community group. That's why they can take on institutions, they can take on the army. But if you feel you are a Burkina citizen, no way you will attack a school, no way you will attack another Burkina citizen. I think that's the issue.
Now, this will be my last question to both of you, but then I'll begin with you, Mr. Ouattara. What do you think governments across West Africa, well, particularly those fighting insurgency, can do to improve their civil relations, especially with communities, in making sure that they are brought on board and that their recommendations or suggestions are used and utilized in combating terrorism?
I think my solution will be a three-pillar solution. So we should build a very strong military. If you have suffered from terrorism this way, it's because our armies was not strong enough at the beginning. Normally, they should have stopped the insurgency right at the beginning. So there should be very strong army with good information, with good intelligence. That's the first pillar. The second pillar is the rule of law. The law should be the same for every citizen, for everybody. And the third pillar, the economic solution. So we should work to offer economic opportunities, economic solution to the youth and all our citizens. And I think if we build those three pillars, our countries will be stable enough.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Steve, you have the floor briefly to do the same as Ouattara in recommending measures or ways governments can improve their civil relations to better tackle security threats.
Number one, I think that governments within the Sahel region must see that they provide dividends of democracy. They must see that they provide what the people need, right? Another angle to it again is that I expect a collaboration amongst the governments or states within the Sahel region. An attack on a country is an attack to all. So when we are talking about insecurity, I think that all hands must be on deck. It's a holistic thing. It's not something that a country can do alone. Just the way I said, political will, synergy, collaboration amongst the Sahel countries, the role of traditional rulers and religious leaders, and all that.
So thank you, Dr. Steve Okorie, and thank you, Mr. Yussouf Ouattara, all the way from Burkina Faso. Thank you all for your beautiful and insightful contributions to this week's edition of In the Sahel.
Thank you very much.
This is a wrap-up of this episode of In the Sahel, WADR's security program aiming to tell the African security crisis the African way. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to my guests and colleagues for their contributions. Remember to join the discussion on X, Instagram at WADR News, on Facebook, WADR English Service, and stream live on WADR.org. Join this frequency, 94.9 FM, West Africa Democracy Radio, every Friday at 7:30 a.m. and the same day at 6:30 p.m. for the read podcast. I'm Abdullah Hassan. Until next week, it's a bye for now.